You're watching Turkey carve a new canal through Istanbul, splitting Europe from Asia, defying every expert who said it couldn't be done. They're building a 45-kilometer waterway that will fundamentally reshape one of the most strategic locations on Earth. Some call it visionary, others call it insane. But if Turkey pulls this off, the balance of global trade and geopolitical power will never be the same again. Let's find out if this is genius or catastrophe. A line is being drawn across one of the oldest cities in human history. In Istanbul, bulldozers and excavators are carving through neighborhoods, forests, and farmland to create something that shouldn't exist. The Istanbul Canal, also called Canal Istanbul, is Turkey's audacious plan to build an entirely new waterway parallel to the Bosphorus Strait, the narrow channel that has connected the Black Sea to the Mediterranean for thousands of years. If completed, this canal will be one of the most expensive and controversial infrastructure projects of the 21st century. And it all depends on whether Turkey can overcome physics, economics, and international opposition that grows stronger every day. To understand why Turkey is attempting something so extreme, you need to understand the Bosphorus. This narrow strait, only 700 meters wide at its narrowest point, is one of the most congested waterways on the planet. Every year, over 40,000 ships squeeze through this urban channel, navigating between apartment buildings, bridges, and mosques. Oil tankers longer than 3 football fields drift past neighborhoods where millions of people live. The risk of collision, environmental disaster, or catastrophic accident grows every single day. The Bosphorus wasn't designed for modern shipping. It was formed by geological forces millions of years ago, long before anyone imagined vessels weighing 200,000 tons trying to navigate its tight curves. But because it's the only natural connection between the Black Sea and the rest of the world's oceans, every country that borders the Black Sea depends on it. Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Georgia. Their economies rely on ships passing through Istanbul. There is no alternative. Until now. In 2019, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced that Turkey would build a second waterway. Not an expansion of the Bosphorus, not a widening project, an entirely separate canal cutting through the European side of Istanbul, creating an artificial island out of the city's western districts. The canal would be 45 kilometers long, 25 meters deep, and wide enough to handle the largest ships afloat. The estimated cost? $15 billion. Maybe more. Perhaps much more. Critics immediately called it a vanity project. An economic black hole, an environmental disaster waiting to happen. But Erdogan insisted this was about Turkey's future, about transforming Istanbul into the undisputed center of global trade between Europe and Asia, about giving Turkey control over a waterway it owns completely, unlike the Bosphorus, which is governed by international treaties that limit what Turkey can do. If the canal works, Turkey gains enormous strategic leverage. If it fails, the country could be drowning in debt for generations. Let's talk about what this canal actually is. Imagine taking a knife and slicing through 45 kilometers of earth, neighborhoods, lakes, and forests. That's what's happening on the western edge of Istanbul. The canal will start near the town of Sazlider on the Black Sea coast and run south to the Kuku-Çekmece Lake area, eventually connecting to the Sea of Marmara. Ships entering from the Black Sea will bypass the Bosphorus entirely, cutting through this new channel and emerging on the other side without ever entering the historic strait. The engineering challenges are staggering. 45 kilometers doesn't sound like much until you consider what has to be moved. We're talking about excavating hundreds of millions of cubic meters of earth, building massive locks or managing water level differences between the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara, constructing bridges across the canal so the city doesn't get split in half, building ports, terminals, and infrastructure on both sides. And doing all of this while millions of people continue living, working, and moving through Istanbul. The project requires moving entire neighborhoods. Thousands of families will be relocated. Forests will be cleared. Water systems will be disrupted. And the environmental impact is a subject of fierce debate. Istanbul sits on multiple fault lines. Seismologists warn that digging a canal through this geologically unstable area could increase earthquake risks. Hydrologists warned that connecting two bodies of water with different salinity levels could destroy marine ecosystems. Urban planners warn that the canal will accelerate uncontrolled development and urban sprawl, making Istanbul even more chaotic than it already is. But Turkey's government dismisses these concerns. They point to the economic benefits. The canal will generate revenue through tolls, just like the Suez Canal or the Panama Canal. It will create hundreds of thousands of jobs during construction and tens of thousands of permanent jobs once operational. It will attract investment to western Istanbul, an area that's been historically underdeveloped, and it will give Turkey something it's never had before: complete control over a major international shipping route. Here's where the politics get complicated. The Bosphorus is governed by the Montreux Convention, a treaty signed in 1936 that gives Turkey sovereignty over the strait, but limits what it can do. Under Montreux, Turkey cannot charge tolls to commercial ships passing through the Bosphorus in peacetime. It cannot block passage to civilian vessels, and it must allow warships from Black Sea nations to pass freely while restricting warships from non-Black Sea nations. This treaty has kept the Bosphorus open and neutral for nearly 90 years, but the Istanbul Canal would not be covered by the Montreux Convention. Because it's an artificial waterway, not a natural strait, Turkey could set its own rules. It could charge tolls. It could restrict access. It could decide which ships pass and which don't. This gives Turkey enormous leverage over countries like Russia, which depends on Bosphorus access to move its Black Sea fleet to the Mediterranean. If Russia wants guaranteed access to global waters, it might have to negotiate with Turkey. And negotiation means leverage. This is why the canal isn't just an infrastructure project. It's a geopolitical power play. Turkey is positioning itself as a gatekeeper, a country that controls one of the world's most strategic choke points. If the canal succeeds, Turkey becomes indispensable. If it fails, Turkey becomes a cautionary tale about overreach and hubris. Construction officially began in 2021. Bulldozers started clearing land near Sazladir. The government held ceremonies. Erdogan gave speeches about Turkey's rise as a global power, but progress has been slow and controversial. Environmental groups filed lawsuits trying to block construction. Opposition parties called it a waste of money that Turkey can't afford. International observers questioned whether the project would ever be completed. And then Turkey's economy started to struggle. Inflation in Turkey skyrocketed. The Turkish lira collapsed against the dollar and euro. The cost of imported materials, machinery, and labor surged. The $15 billion estimate started to look hopelessly optimistic. Some analysts now predict the real cost could exceed $25 billion or even $30 billion. For a country already dealing with economic instability, currency crisis, and high debt, this is a massive gamble. But Erdogan has staked his legacy on this project. He's compared it to the great engineering feats of Ottoman history. He's positioned it as proof that modern Turkey can achieve what skeptics say is impossible. And he's made it clear that no amount of opposition will stop him. Construction continues. Land is being cleared, earth is being moved, the canal is happening regardless of what critics say. Let's talk about how this compares to other canal projects around the world. The Panama Canal took 10 years to build and cost the equivalent of about $10 billion in today's money. It's 50 kilometers long and handles about 14,000 ships per year, generating over $2 billion in annual revenue. The Suez Canal in Egypt is 193 kilometers long and handles about 20,000 ships per year, generating over $5 billion annually. These canals are money machines, they're essential to global trade, and they've made their host countries strategically vital. Turkey is betting that the Istanbul Canal can achieve similar success. The Bosphorus already handles 40,000 transits per year, more than Panama and Suez combined. If even a fraction of that traffic shifts to the new canal, if Turkey charges competitive tolls, the revenue potential is enormous. Some estimates suggest the canal could generate $3 billion to $5 billion per year once fully operational. Over decades, that could pay back the construction cost and generate profit. But there's a problem. Ships won't use the canal unless it makes economic sense. If the tolls are too high, shipping companies will stick with the free Bosphorus. If the canal doesn't save them time or reduce risk, they have no incentive to pay for an alternative route. Turkey needs to thread a delicate needle, charging enough to make the project profitable, but not so much that it drives customers away. And it needs to convince the world that the canal is safer, faster, and more reliable than the Bosphorus. The environmental concerns are impossible to ignore. Istanbul is already one of the most ecologically stressed cities on Earth. The Bosphorus is heavily polluted, air quality is poor, water resources are strained, and now Turkey wants to dig a massive trench through watersheds, forests, and wetlands that provide critical ecosystem services. Environmental groups warn that the canal will destroy habitats, contaminate water supplies, and accelerate climate-related problems like flooding and erosion. There's also the question of what happens to the excavated earth. Hundreds of millions of cubic meters of dirt, rock, and soil have to go somewhere. Where? How do you dispose of that much material without creating environmental disasters? These questions don't have good answers yet. The government says it will be managed responsibly. Critics are skeptical. Then there's the seismic risk. Istanbul sits on the North Anatolian Fault, one of the most active earthquake zones in the world. Scientists have warned for years that a major earthquake is overdue. When it hits, and it will hit eventually, the damage could be catastrophic. Now imagine adding a 45-kilometer canal filled with water cutting through unstable ground. Some geologists warn that the canal could act as a fault line itself, creating new risks or amplifying existing ones. Others say the risks are manageable with proper engineering, but nobody knows for sure what will happen when you fundamentally alter the geology of an earthquake zone. Despite all these challenges, there are genuine strategic reasons why this canal might make sense. The Bosphorus is genuinely dangerous. The channel is narrow, winding, and congested. Accidents happen regularly. In 2020, a cargo ship lost control and crashed into a historic waterfront mansion. In 2018, a tanker nearly collided with another vessel in heavy fog. These aren't rare incidents, they're regular occurrences in one of the world's busiest and most difficult waterways. If a major accident happens, if an oil tanker spills its cargo in the middle of Istanbul, the environmental and economic damage would be catastrophic. Millions of people live along the Bosphorus. A major spill could contaminate drinking water, destroy fisheries, and shut down shipping for weeks or months. The cost of such a disaster would dwarf the cost of building the canal. From this perspective, the canal is insurance, a way to reduce the risk that Istanbul's geography creates. The canal also offers Turkey a chance to reshape Istanbul's development. For decades, the city has expanded chaotically, with little planning or infrastructure to support its growth. The population has exploded from a few million in the 1970s to over 15 million today. Traffic is nightmarish, housing is expensive, infrastructure is overwhelmed. The canal project includes plans for new cities, new transit systems, new housing developments along its route. If managed well, this could create a more livable, sustainable Istanbul. If managed poorly, it could accelerate the urban chaos that already exists. Turkey is also betting on its geographic position. Istanbul is the only city in the world that sits on two continents. It's the bridge between Europe and Asia, the gateway between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. For thousands of years, whoever controlled Istanbul controlled trade between East and West, North and South. The Ottomans understood this. The Byzantines understood this. Now modern Turkey wants to leverage this position for the 21st century. China's Belt and Road Initiative is reshaping global trade routes. New shipping lanes are emerging. The Arctic is opening up due to climate change. Supply chains are being reconfigured. In this environment, Turkey sees an opportunity. If it can offer faster, safer, more reliable passage between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, it can attract the cargo traffic that's increasingly flowing between Asia and Europe. The canal is Turkey's bid to remain relevant in a rapidly changing world. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The canal might not get built. Or it might get built but fail to achieve its goals. Mega projects have a long history of cost overruns, delays, and underperformance. Turkey's economy is fragile. Political opposition is fierce. International pressure is building. If Erdogan loses power, a new government might cancel the project entirely. If costs spiral out of control, Turkey might be forced to abandon it halfway through. If environmental lawsuits succeed, construction could be halted indefinitely. And even if the canal gets built, success is not guaranteed. Shipping companies are conservative. They stick with what works. Convincing them to change routes, pay tolls, and trust a new canal will take years of marketing and diplomacy. Turkey will have to prove that the canal is worth it. And that proof might take a decade or more to materialize. So what happens next? Construction continues, but slowly. The government keeps pushing forward, but opposition keeps pushing back. International observers keep watching, waiting to see if Turkey can pull off what many consider impossible. The canal is simultaneously a symbol of ambition and a symbol of hubris. It represents Turkey's desire to reclaim its historical role as a bridge between civilizations. But it also represents the risks of betting everything on a single grand vision. If you're watching from outside Turkey, you might wonder why you should care about a canal being built thousands of kilometers away. Here's why. Global trade depends on a small number of critical choke points. The Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, the Bosphorus. When any of these gets disrupted, the entire world feels it. Prices rise, supply chains break, economies suffer. The Istanbul Canal could become the next critical choke point, or it could fail and leave Turkey buried in debt. Either way, the consequences will ripple across continents. This is also a test case for whether developing nations can execute mega projects without Western financing or expertise. Turkey is building this canal largely on its own, using domestic contractors, domestic financing, and domestic political will. If it succeeds, it proves that countries don't need to rely on institutions like the World Bank or the IMF to achieve transformative infrastructure. If it fails, it reinforces the conventional wisdom that megaprojects require international support and expertise. The Istanbul Canal is Turkey's attempt to rewrite the rules, to prove that geography is not destiny, to show that a country can reshape itself through sheer determination and vision. Whether that vision is brilliant or reckless depends on who you ask. But one thing is certain, the world is watching. And what happens in Istanbul over the next decade could change the map of global trade forever. You're watching Earth move, steel rise, water flow where it never flowed before. This is Turkey building something that shouldn't be possible. A canal that could rival the great waterways of history or become the greatest infrastructure failure of the modern era. The machines keep digging. The vision keeps driving forward. And somewhere between the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara, the future of Istanbul is being carved into the earth, 1 cubic meter at a time.